It's February 17th, 1972, and another remarkable event is about to be uncovered by Arion, Rebecca, and Olly, the Retrospectors.
15,007,033 was, astonishingly, the amount of Model Ts that had rolled off the production line at Ford between 1908 and 1927, the world's most popular car ever, until today in history in 1972, when the 15,007,034th Volkswagen Beetle was made, thereby breaking the record and becoming, for a time, the biggest selling motor vehicle of all time.
Yeah, and the moment was immortalised in a photo which shows a bunch of auto industry guys, you know those weird grocer coats that car guys seem to wear until like the 1980s? They're standing around a Volkswagen Beetle, it's decked out in flowers, and I know the point is, this is the moment the Volkswagen Beetle has become the best-selling car, beating the Model T, but it is funny seeing them all under a big sign that reads 15,007,034. It seems like such a random number outside of context.
It's funny as well because I thought that the car in question was known as the Beetle everywhere on Earth, but apparently it has loads of nicknames, including the frog, the flea, the cockroach, the turtle, the mouse, and in Denmark it's called a pregnant roller skate, which I liked, or also the Hitler sled.
That one got me.
Okay, yeah, so newsflash for those of you who don't know, Hitler becomes Chancellor of Germany in 1933 and then essentially almost straight away commissions the Volkswagen, specifically the Beetle. Hitler's plan was that the German public, irrespective of whether they worked in a factory or what they did for a living, could buy, for only 1,000 Reichsmarks, 31 weeks' pay for the average German worker in the 1930s, could buy themselves a car, something that Germans had not had access to before, something that Americans had access to, of course. And he came up with this concept of Volkswagen, the people's car.
Yeah, when the Nazis came to power in 1933, only 1 in 50 Germans owned a car. I mean, obviously the country had been recovering from World War I for a large part of that time. But the issue was that one of Hitler's pet projects, one of the first things he actually did on coming to power, was to launch a really ambitious program of motorways. The issue was who was going to fill all of these lovely new roads. Nobody had a car. So this was a really important part of the project to get Germany moving. Otherwise, there would have just been this horrible white elephant spectre of empty motorways up and down the country.
Hitler turned to Ferdinand Porsche to design what became the Beetle. And it's quite interesting because if you look at a Porsche 911 from the front, there are certain design characteristics that are similar. And, they're such different cars in the popular imagination, aren't they? But they do have that kind of cutesy lamps that look like eyes thing going on in both cases. Yeah. And what Porsche did was he completely reconceptualized what basically every motor manufacturer had done since the Model T, which was he switched the trunk and the engine. So you have the engine at the back and the trunk in the front.
Hitler also drew his own concept for the car's design. I don't know how much of his sketch made it through the design process, but even despite the fact that Porsche did borrow a bunch of ideas from his fellow designers, the prototypes that he kept coming up with just got more and more expensive, which was exactly contrary to the idea that Hitler had had in the first place. And so the project was proving almost entirely untenable. And in fact, by 1938, only 600 cars had been manufactured, and they had mostly been delivered to regime leaders and so on. And once the war began, the factory Volkswagen Werk in Wolfsburg was creating vehicles for the army. They sort of had to sideline this project because, the issue of getting machine guns around the place became more important than people being able to take their baby.
Yeah, but still, the fact that the factory had been established at all in this time is pretty impressive, really, because it wasn't just the factory, it was the whole town of Wolfsburg exists because it was there to create what was being called the City of the Strength Through Joy car. Catchy. And Hitler had obviously been influenced by the phenomenon that we've talked about on the show before of the kind of company town in the US where you build an entire new city where there's everything laid on for the workers, providing they're not Jewish, so that they can make enough cars to satisfy demand. And that needed to be done at huge scale because they wanted the cars to be cheap. So they had to make loads and loads and loads of them. So they were just on the cusp of probably being able to deliver on the Volkswagen vision. But then the war came along, and the factory ended up making parts for V-1 flying bombs. They ended up making armaments for the German army. There was even at one point a concentration camp on site of the factory. And ironically, it was thanks to a Brit, Major Ivan Hurst, that the Beetle was eventually produced at scale. After the Second World War, Germany was carved up between the Allies. The British ended up controlling Wolfsburg, which had been completely decimated. And Hurst was in his 20s and just realised that the pragmatic thing to do was to start up the factory, because that will solve the problem of importing vehicles at great expense to the Brits, and it will help boost the local economy, which of course is one of the other things that the British wanted to do there, to make sure that Germany didn't end up back in the similar circumstances that it was before the Second World War. And the Brits ran Volkswagen for 4 years.
And there was talk of bringing the whole production line to the UK, but it didn't happen because the British auto industry were completely unimpressed with the Volkswagen Beetle. There was a report where they said, the vehicle does not meet the fundamental technical requirement of a motor car. It is quite unattractive to the average buyer. To build the car commercially would be a completely uneconomic enterprise. So they left the whole thing in Germany.
It was also offered to Ford as well, by the way.
Yeah, his comment was, I don't think what we're being offered here is worth a damn. And there was an opinion piece by a German automotive journalist who wrote in 1949 that before the war, the VW Beetle existed only on paper. It cheated people out of their savings and yielded a lot of propaganda. So I think there was just this broad antipathy towards the car up until the point that this very clever advertising agency got involved, and they basically flew in the face of everything that people had done to advertise cars previously, which was all about it being bigger and better than your neighbour's car, and they embraced the fact that this was a small, cheap vehicle that had a lot of problems.
Yeah, this was the American campaign for the Beetle, Think Small, which was created by the New York ad agency DDB, which fascinatingly was a predominantly Jewish-based organisation. So amongst their other clients were a Mozza cracker company and El Al, the Israeli national airline. But they got the contract to do Volkswagen and decided to be honest about the flaws of the vehicle as seen by an American audience, that it was small and that maybe it was ugly compared to a Chrysler or whatever. But that for the hippie generation, which is of course what the love bug, the Beetle, became associated with, this was countercultural as a concept. You know, I don't want the same car my parents want, the post-war dream that they want. I want a car that's just practical and small and isn't the American dream. Obviously, they didn't emphasize the Nazi origins. I'm going to pack this off when I go to college or Woodstock or whatever. And it got a whole second market, you know, amongst hippies.
Yeah, I mean, it was just in time to capture that quirky 1960s spirit that, you know, people were in the mood to embrace what was being portrayed as this goofy little car, which was great, really, because not only was it leaning into the supposed flaws on, you know, in the American market of a car like the Beetle, but also, as you mentioned, the whole Nazi thing. What better way to erase that connection by being like, look, it's a cute little underdog car. Like it looks adorable. It's got eyes. Its name is Herbie, and it's a love bug, and it has nothing to do with Nazi Germany. So, I mean, did you know that The Love Bug got 3 sequels? I knew one. I knew there was Herbie Rides Again.
Yeah.
There was also Herbie Goes to Monte Carlo.
Yeah, seen it.
Yeah?
Yeah, I've also seen the reboot from about 10 years ago with, I don't know, some teenage
Lindsay
star.
Lohan?
Lindsay Lohan,
It was,
thank you.
I mean, it's more like 20 years ago, let's be honest.
Okay.
And, well, did you complete the set, Olly? Did you also watch Herbie Goes Bananas?
Yep, seen it, yeah.
Wow, you might be the only person in the world to have seen all of the Herbie movies.
I don't even like cars, but I do like Disney film.
Bringing Herbie films back to life better have been called a reboot. I mean, it was a missed opportunity if they didn't do that.
What had happened through the 1970s was that the Beetle was losing ground to new compact cars, lots of them from the Japanese manufacturers like Honda and Toyota. And now you had brands like Renault, Fiat and Vauxhall that were all in the market at the same kind of price point, also offering better reliability, better performance. So there just wasn't as much of a place anymore for the Beetle.
Until Volkswagen relaunched it as the new Beetle in 1997 using the underpinnings of a VW Golf hatchback, but charging a lot more because it was a Beetle and it had a cult fan base. And repeated all the same tricks again, clever advertising campaign, slogan, the engine's in the front, but its heart is in the right place. Still with the iconic rounded fenders and lights. My mother-in-law bought 2 of them. And that managed to steady the ship for another decade or so, although they did finally cease production of the new Beetle in 2019.
Was that when they unveiled the Hitler-sled campaign?
And so another week of retrospecting ends. But next week begins a day early at Club Retrospectors. Join us now to get an exclusive episode every Sunday. Patreon.com/retrospectors. Part of the Acast Creator Network.